Welcome to Book and Lounge. I'm your host, Jacqueline.
Today we're going to be talking about Black Spartacus, if I can get it right. And it's basically a book about the life of Toussaint Louverture. And I'm joined by Katrina, David, Taiwo, Annette, and Rena. How are you guys?
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Hiya. Fine.
So, the book is Black Spartacus, and it's about the life and times of Toussaint Louverture. Just gonna start by asking generally about him. Before you read this book, how much did you know about him?
Yeah, I can kick off and say I didn't know anything about him, to be honest. So this was all new for me. I didn't know his history or anything. So yeah, it was interesting to read.
I knew the name, but I didn't really know the backstory. And I knew that he was connected to that part of the world. And I knew that he was successful in his military endeavors and that they captured him eventually. I didn't know how he was captured, but I knew that he died in France. So I had kind of snippets and sketches of his life and that he was a very big figure in the Caribbean, but I didn't really know details.
Yeah, same as Tyra. I knew the name and his connection to that part of the world, but that's it. I couldn't tell you when he was born or anything like that. So yeah, just a few bits and pieces here and there.
No, I didn't really know anything at all about him. If you'd said the name, I'd have connected it with Haiti, but I don't think I could have done any more than that. So it was really good to educate myself a little bit.
I guess I'm sort of like in between you and Taiwo. So I knew a little bit about him. I didn't know the fact that he was actually captured and that actually he wasn't the first leader of independent Haiti. I always assumed that he was the first because I think other articles that I'd read before sort of referred to him as such. So I was quite surprised that when in the end he was actually captured and that somebody else then became leader of the free country. Like you, Katrina, I think it was a great read, and I'm really glad that I educated myself because I found out so much, especially the geopolitics around Haiti. Anyway, I jump ahead.
I just have to jump in and say I really, really did enjoy the book. It was a labor of love, as in there were some nights when I just thought, for me to get through this book, I'm going to have to stand up rather than sit down to read it and just plow through from, one section to another section. So I kind of divvied it up to make sure that each day I've covered a particular amount of ground in order to get to the end, which was fine until I got towards the last bits of it where he's already been captured. It's like building up to this climax. He's then been captured, and after that it was a real struggle because I knew that he'd been captured. I knew that he'd died in prison and that nasty Bonaparte man had done him bad. And then the rest of it was like the building of his legend, which for me was quite boring. But I did complete it. And the other thing I'd like to say, just very briefly, because I'm taking up too much of your time, the guy, Sudhir Hazareesingh, I hadn't heard of him before, but obviously from the comments on the back of my book, I've got the hardcover, where they're talking about one of his previous books, How the French Think. It seems that he was really the right man for the job in terms of a kind of really comprehensive biography of Toussaint.
Mm-hmm.
So although he was very forgiving in some places where maybe he could have been a little bit more, it could have been a bit tougher on him, some of the things that he did, I think he was extremely thorough in the research that he did. And it gave me ideas of other things. For example, C.L.R. James, the Black, is it
Jacobeans.
Yeah, which I know my brother has a copy. I've never read it. And I felt I need to read it because it would give me another insight into Toussaint.
So I made it by force. That's really bad, but by force last night. I made it to page 100. I'm trying to do your approach, Tyro. Like I'm trying to, I need to get through these parts. Yeah, so I completed a master's 2 years ago, so now I really feel like I'm back at school. But I don't think that's necessarily a good thing because when I'm reading it, I don't think I'm taking everything in because I'm just saying I need to get through. And so I don't think I'm fully taking in some of the text that's been written. And then it's like someone's written it's compelling and accurate narrative that reads like fiction. I think some parts have read like fiction for me and other parts it hasn't. And so then I'm like, oh, do I need to write this down? There's so much going on in my head. It's quite academic for me, I think. So I can tell that he's really done a lot of research, and I think he's definitely the right person to write this book. But for me, it's not an easy read. I'm now just gonna go with the flow, and if it takes me till spring, then so be it. It's okay. Yeah.
Remember, there's no exam.
Yeah, I feel like there is an exam. That's the thing. There's so many dates and stuff. It feels like I'm prepping for something, but I know I'm not. And
Maybe you feel that this is the exam.
it's true. That's why by force last night I read 20 pages, but I still don't know what to say.
Okay, Katrina?
Well, yeah, I sympathise quite a lot with what you said, Annette, because I didn't leave myself enough time to read it because I arrogantly thought I'm a fast reader, and then realised that actually this needs quite a lot of devotion. Some of the parts where he's going from one place to another in Haiti, and you get a huge amount of detail, which would be really good if I was doing an exam about it or I was writing a paper about him. It'd be brilliant. But as somebody who just wants to kind of know about his life, I think without remembering all that, I got a lot of information about like his character, how he approached things, which was very interesting. And
Don't forget his mistresses.
There wasn't much about his mistresses, though.
actually, you don't know about his mistresses, but we know a lot about his general character and how he approaches life as a general, an army general. And I sort of enjoyed the second half. Like, my book's got pictures in the middle, and past the pictures, I actually enjoyed it more. I think I found it easier to keep it all in mind as what was happening. And what you said, Taiwo, about the author perhaps doesn't challenge him enough. I don't know I entirely agree with that, but I found it very interesting to see how he dealt with the kind of dilemmas of being the only person who really was running Haiti, even if he wasn't officially running it. I thought he was between a rock and a hard place, really. But I'm sure we'll come on to more of that in later on.
Yeah, I find it a very challenging read as well. I think the small print didn't help, and with the volume of words within the book, and I think the images did help. It was really interesting to see the illustrations. It helped the story to come alive. I feel that we see him as a very diplomatic Machiavellian leader. We see all his powerful side, but then I think, as we've touched upon, there may be gaps in his personal life. We don't tend to see very much about his mistresses or his children, and there's a kind of a sense of, I wonder what it was really like for him. So I think, on balance, it would, of course, be a historical book, so it would focus on his professional life and his professional persona, but it does kind of make, and this is a good thing probably, it does make you start to think, well, if he grew up and in slavery and his family were slaves, and it makes you wonder what was his feelings and what would his feelings have been when he was in all these public situations. And there are a lot of public situations we get a kind of insight into, but it leaves lots of questions for us to think about. What was it really like for him? So yeah, it kind of interesting, but leaving me wanting a bit more as to what it was really like.
I started it and then I kind of found it quite heavy at times and it's very descriptive. So sometimes I found it quite overwhelming. So I had to put it down, do something completely different, or read something completely different, and then come back to it. But other than that, I found it very informative. I found that it had a lot of detail on what life was like in Haiti, but also the geopolitics of what was happening and the struggle between other European countries for territories outside their own countries. So that came through quite well. The one thing that I wanted to see a bit more, and I think, David, you mentioned this, I didn't feel there was enough about Toussaint's personal life. I would have wanted to read more about the man rather than the general. And I felt like the book focused very much on the general. But other than that, I think it's a seminal title. I think it's one that should be in the curriculum. Absolutely. And I do think that the author actually did a lot of research.
When you say you wanted to know more about the man, is that the family man rather than the politician? Because I felt
Yes.
that the fact that he was a general was a main, well, it was a major chunk of his life and what we know him for. But equally, the fact that he had so many balls to juggle at the same time, because he had to satisfy so many competing priorities, that he had to be the consummate politician. He had to be, as David was saying, Machiavellian.
I don't think it was him. I think it's more the author. The author. I think he focused very much on him, the general. Maybe there just wasn't the material to include about his own personal life. I wanted to know about his wife, about his children, and his relationship with his wife and mistresses and children. I wanted to know more about that, but I felt that aspect of it was there was very little. And I think I would have just enjoyed it a bit more had he included him, the man. The way he's been presented, he's a hero, right? And yes, he does talk about, some of his lesser, I guess, good qualities. But predominantly, he's presented as a hero. I think that's what I mean. Anybody else feels the same or completely disagree? I'm going to take the silence as you guys disagree.
I mean, I agree to an extent. I agree to an extent in that if they considered the man and his household, so his domestic life, as long as they kind of compare and contrast his relationship with his wife and his kids compared to the mistresses, then fine. But I wasn't so much interested in the domestic aspect of things. I think it was more to me the military side of things, the political side of things, and there was something else I couldn't quite remember. Okay, and then his relationship with the church, which is a big thing for him, and then his relationship with Africa, because he had a very strong link to the traditional voodoo culture.
But that was only at the beginning, wasn't it? I
Mm.
think towards, yeah, because I felt like towards the end, he'd sort of started abandoning that. And wasn't there a point where, at a point where he had completely banned voodoo
Yes,
or African worship, religions?
He banned the
yes.
assembling of people, but that was more, I thought, a social political move.
I think it was for social political reasons. So what he really thought, I don't know. But that's what I found was very interesting in the book, is that there is a progression of him as he's trying to deal with the different political situations. And you do see him become sort of more dictatorial, really, as time goes on, less compassionate in his dealings with prisoners, and making a lot of decisions that obviously he's going to be criticized for nowadays, towards buying in the slaves, and also was criticized at the time, of course. But I just think it's just so interesting because he is in such a difficult situation that he's got to weave through the dilemmas of it all, and it's bound to go wrong. It's never going to end well, is what I was thinking for him.
I kept thinking of that expression when they say, "Oh, it's the economy, dummy." He really wanted the, he wanted the economy to pick up, but how do you do it when you no longer have slaves to drive the economy? How do how do you produce the sugarcane? Because it's an agrarian-based economy, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then you've got these people, these various factions working against you, and the rumor mill. There's always so much gossip about these people are trying to take over in order to reintroduce slavery. So you have to balance so many competing demands, which I think was, impossible for anyone to do. And the fact also, the way in which he seemed to be driven right from the get-go, he seemed to be, he's all over the island, he's riding all hours, he's working all hours, he's wearing out his secretaries. He just seems to be more of a CEO than the CEO that is driven nowadays, a pure workaholic. It's like he's always going to die young. Whatever happens, he's going to die young, he's going to burn out. But he will burn very brightly, but it can't last long. And I think he knew that.
He's quite a mature man, isn't he? By the time he starts taking on that role, it seemed to me he must be, didn't we say he must be around 50 or
50s,
something?
yeah.
There was room to tell us a bit more about his wife and mistresses before all that. I imagine he had more time for them before that.
Yeah,
Possibly.
but there's no documentation about it. That's the problem.
Yeah, I guess.
Because everyone was too afraid.
Yeah, but then again, he does talk from like oral sources. He reports quite a lot of oral sources. So didn't anybody ever reminisce about maybe they didn't. I don't know.
Or maybe they were too busy trying to create the legend. Yeah, this is a man who was, very highly thought of. And so maybe they didn't feel that including his personal life and talking about his personal life was important. It was he was the hero. Anyhow, so he defeated France, Britain, and Spain to transform Haiti into a cradle for enslaved Africans across the Caribbean. And so, what qualities and skills did you think he possessed that helped him to achieve that? David, you already mentioned he was Machiavellian.
Yeah, I think there are also times when he had quite a sense of humor. I'm trying to remember those points, but he kind of was self-deprecating in his humor. I think towards other leaders, and I think that might have helped him to kind of gain their approval and gain their familiarity. So I think those kind of qualities would have helped him, and I think because he was very cultured, so he had a good understanding, quite multicultural, wasn't he, and intercultural in his thinking. He was able to understand all the different perspectives, synthesize that, and then try and navigate a way forward for him to do the right thing. And you could sense that abolishing slavery was there for him as a kind of an end goal to kind of make that happen. So he would use all the different tools, all of his skill set to manage that. So yeah, I think all that kind of feeds into his diplomacy and the Machiavellian nature. So yeah, I thought it was really interesting how he did that.
What I really liked about him, and probably not a good quality to admire, but how he played different rulers of each other. So he would tell the French, "Yeah, I'm absolutely completely on your side," or the Spanish, and whilst telling the British exactly the same thing. And so you never really knew where you stood with him. And but surprisingly, they believed him. And so I liked the fact that he was very pragmatic in that way. He knew what he wanted, and he knew what he wanted to achieve. And so he just played one against the other and basically achieved his ultimate goal. It's quite a skill to have, and to be able to actually hold it together when you're doing that. As I said, I admire that, but then I'm not sure really whether I should be admired. I should be admiring it. But also the other thing is, he was described as sleeping about 4 hours and having a ton of energy and being a really great horseman. And so I think he was an extraordinary guy.
Mm. Mm.
I mean, thinking about the era at that point, as far as the West was concerned, all black people were inferior. All black people were stupid. They were not capable of understanding high concepts. But for him to be accepted and by all these European leaders, he must have had possessed some really extraordinary qualities.
Yeah, how he came across to me, I mean, he does come across as a hero the way he is portrayed in the book, and I accept that. He got a high confidence in himself, even from early on. And even his father, although his father was a slave, he seemed to be very respected within the community. So some of that got on to Toussaint. Yeah, he just got so much energy and and self-discipline. He seemed to have tremendous self-discipline to do all that he did. I thought it was brilliant. I just thought he was a very brilliant man, because it's one thing to play off parties against one another. Lots of people try to do that, but not so many people do it successfully, do they? Oh, you were saying, Jackie, about, the general opinion of black people in
Hmm.
the time. I think it was that sort of situation, where sometimes where people go on about black people and then say, but I don't mean you, talking to their friend that's next to them. And I think that's how they would have been with Toussaint, that obviously he was a very able, clever, well-read person, and highly principled. I mean, he certainly came across a little bit as more French than the French in the principles of the revolution that he was wedded to. Yeah, I just thought he was brilliant.
Hmm.
I thought he'd gone beyond being a black man. He'd gone beyond color, like OJ or something like that. He'd transcended. He was no longer black. That's the way I looked at him, though, really, because I mean, and even the fact that some of the things that he did, I felt that the sense of self-belief that he had was so great that he was bordering on almost being a messiah for his people, which, when you get into that mindset, is going to be your downfall anyway.
Yeah.
Because there was the instance where some of the people that were on his side had gone over to the French side, And then for him to convince them that they were still his brothers, he walked towards them. I think he bared his chest or whatever. And I think one of them took a shot at him and got him in the thigh. But he still didn't retaliate. And he was able to convince them to return to the fold, as in, I'm your father. You know, he considered himself to be their, like a father figure to them. I just felt that the way he viewed his life, as in, I will achieve certain things, is almost as if to say it was his fate and he knew it. You know, like maybe Caesar or Bonaparte, where you think, I was born to rule, I was born to do these great things. That's the kind of self-belief that I felt that he had, or at least it came across to a large extent.
When you mentioned I was born to rule, right? Do you know who came to mind?
Who?
Bojo.
Yeah, but Bojo looks at Churchill, doesn't he?
He thinks he was born to rule, doesn't he?
He thinks, but he can't carry it off.
I digress. What do you guys think were his values? And do you think that as time progressed, his values seem to change? Taiwo, you're shaking your head.
I don't think his values changed. I think, as David was saying about being pragmatic and also being Machiavellian, I think he simply adapted to the circumstances, but his values remained steadfast. He just bent in order not to break.
I'm not sure I agree with that, but I don't think Katrina does either.
I'm
Values
not
are
too
about
sure
interpretation
either.
because his values were based on his strong Catholic background plus his traditional African roots. The two combined meant that he was very, for example, when he would capture people, much of the time he would let them go. He was very magnanimous in victory. And also, he wouldn't spill blood unless he felt there was no option but to do so. So he had a very strong sense of morality. I'm not saying he was always moral, particularly if you consider morality the way we consider morality in these modern times.
I wasn't even thinking about morality. But anyway, I'll let Katrina challenge you.
I just think that as things progressed, he was very driven. There's something, he's got issues about time, hasn't he? And there's a whole chapter, I think, with a heading about time. He wanted to achieve everything in his span of time, and the end did start justifying the means as things went along, and so he became less magnanimous. I don't think that means his sort of underlying principles changed. He was just so driven, I think, that and having to choose between not good options. Like you said, Taiwo, when you see yourself as a messiah, it's the beginning of the end. I felt like he was getting to a point where somebody needed to stop him.
So almost as if to say he was laying a foundation for someone else to build upon, even if he didn't realize it at the time himself. But it's, I guess, making sure that the foundation was firm.
Yeah, I don't think he realized it because he seemed to want to achieve it all within his time.
Yeah, I guess because it's an urgency, isn't it? So he understood the urgency, so that's why he'd want to do it in his lifetime. It wasn't something he'd want to pass on. He'd want things to be actioned proficiently and efficiently as possible, really.
I do think that as he grew older, he did change somewhat. He was very at the beginning compassionate towards the black slaves. Towards the end, he wanted them to be indentured laborers. At the beginning, as I said, he wanted freedom for everybody, but towards the end, driven by this desire for the economy, as you said, Taiwo, he'd completely changed, and he was quite happy to buy slaves and also keep all these black former slaves indentured. Is that the right word, indentured? What's the right word?
Slavery by another name, basically.
Yeah.
Indentured laborers.
And so and then this whole thing about forcing people to get married.
I believe he was spiraling to paranoia. I feel that he had some kind of almost breakdown, like Caesar. You know, they're out to get me. They're going to stab me in the back and all the rest of it.
He was paranoid.
But the thing is, it's true, isn't it? For those people who get into those sorts of positions, they get paranoid, but actually they have every right to be paranoid because, I mean, everything he was trying to achieve, it was never really going to be achievable in the, like what you were saying, Jackie, the geopolitical, I like that phrase, climate of the time. He's hemmed in with the British and the Spanish and all these people. And as soon as the French and the British aren't at loggerheads, it's going to unravel. It was,
And he knew it.
Yeah. And the whole position of having a colony, it's all very well to say that, like the French do nowadays, that it's a department of France. They hadn't thought of that at the time. But I mean, a colony is obviously really there to feed the country that is the colonial master. So it can never really work, can it? That you can have that same liberty and equality that he truly believed in. I mean, that's what I mean about being more French than the French, because he did believe in it.
He believed in the Republic more than many of the Republicans.
Absolutely.
Katrina, you mentioned the revolution. Do you think that the Haitian Revolution, or Saint Dominique as it was known then, do you think that they would have succeeded without the French Revolution, which basically proclaimed equality amongst all men?
I don't know. I think a character like Toussaint, they might have been inspired by something else to go through a similar process, because there would have definitely been some sort of slave uprisings over time, and whether somebody would have been able to unite and play people off to with a different inspiration, I suppose it's possible.
But I'm thinking there were slave revolutions, or at least uprisings elsewhere. I mean, let's take Jamaica, for example. Not even just Jamaica, in other Caribbean countries as well. But they never really succeeded. It was only Haiti that was successful. I think that the French Revolution was a catalyst. I don't know how successful he would have been had the French Revolution not taken part. And also, let's not forget, the French were a bit distracted after the revolution. And I think that maybe they also took their eye off the ball, which gave him freedom and more leeway to do the things that he wanted to do.
But I still think that the character of Toussaint seems to have been the driving force, and it was possible for him to have been inspired by something else if the French Revolution hadn't happened. I think the good thing about the revolution, like what you said, it kept the French occupied. And the distance meant they couldn't take that much notice of what was going on. But also there were white French people there who believed in the revolution, and he managed to convince them of the correctness of what he was doing. I'm not saying there were many, but I think there were some, and that helped a lot at the beginning.
I agree with what Katrina is saying, because if not for the French Revolution, he would have got the inspiration elsewhere, but he was able to build upon it. And by virtue of his particular character, I mean, he was a very unique individual, the way he was able to draw various threads together in a successful way, unlike many others. So he combined his African origins and the fact that he wanted to overthrow slavery with the whole republicanism and the equality of man and the brotherhood thing with the morality of the Catholic Church. So you're getting all these kind of disparate factors being woven together into one whole. Most people wouldn't be able to do that, but he, and also his charisma as well.
Mm-hmm.
Almost by virtue of force of personality in and of itself, he was able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I mean. And that energy and health. I don't know how he managed to stay healthy for as long as he did. The way he seemed to treat himself. I don't think you often get all those things in the same person. The revolution obviously helped him.
And also the single-mindedness, because he was driven.
Yeah.
Almost as to say, he knew he wasn't going to live long. And he knew that he had a short period of time within which to achieve the things that he hoped to achieve. But that whole idea of being driven, because many other people, had they reached the heights that he had reached, things like money, the accumulation of wealth, the accumulation of wives and mistresses, gluttony, various other things would have been the downfall, because, you've reached a peak and you have all this free time almost, you have all this money or influence, authority coming in. But for him, it didn't work that way. I mean, he got injured, didn't he, in battle, that his teeth, I think the front teeth were knocked out.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he goes to these villages, it's like, it's almost as if he's come down from Mount Olympus. Zeus has come down from Mount Olympus to visit us, and they're all coming out and they're bringing cake. They're bringing food that is soft because they know that his front teeth are missing. It's that kind of regard. He's like a rock star, or bigger than a rock star, and they love him for it, and they know that he's genuine. He really does want to take them with him. This is obviously before he descends into paranoia and all the rest of it.
So then, who would you say were the other key players in the Saint Dominique Revolution and subsequent independence? Stunned you guys into silence again. French or even Haitian or Saint Dominican?
I mean, that's part of it, isn't it? There's a lot of other players, not all of whose names I remember very well without checking, but he does stand so high, doesn't he? Because on the sort of white French side, they're important, but he manages to get rid of them. There was the first one who seemed to truly believe in what he was doing, who went back to France for some reason. And then there were two subsequent ones who he managed to get rid of. Then there's that nephew, Moise or something.
Moise, I think.
Yeah,
Moise.
Dessalines, of course, is important and eventually sort of takes over.
He had quite a few generals, some who betrayed him towards the end, but his generals seemed to be quite loyal most of the time. They would go without, they instilled discipline on the troops. They would sometimes go to battle with very little, simply because he managed to inspire them.
Yes, his inspiration. I mean, obviously he needed all those people, but to me, they don't come out so strongly for me in this book.
It's a bit like jiu-jitsu, where you use your opponent's weight against them. So the heavier they are, as long as you have the moves, you use it to your advantage. I mean, he was punching above his weight.
Most of the time.
Yeah, the military capability that he had, because he knew the terrain, but he had that military mind. He knew how to strategize. And the fact that they used to say, oh, his men are ill-equipped, his men are semi-naked because they don't have the uniforms, and yet they were so disciplined. But I felt that it was his charisma and the fact that he walked the walk and talked the talk. They could see it. They could see when, he barely slept. They could see that, he's like the Scarlet Pimpernel. He seems to just appear everywhere at the same time and then just disappear. He's all over the island, riding all hours. And even, the whole thing about him having loads and loads of money, gold or whatever, treasure when he died. And yet he was the one saying he has very little wealth. Most of his wealth is actually in a couple of properties that he had. He wasn't interested in the trappings of wealth. His focus, his drive was about freeing his people, making sure that they would remain free and trying to unify the island. So his focus was political, wasn't it? Socio-political. And it was a true focus, although he lost his way towards the end. But I think that people believed in him because he was believable. He was genuine.
What part, if any, do you think voodoo and ancestral African religions played in the revolution?
He was just able to use some of it to his strengths, especially the kind of the voodoo aspect of, but I guess with how people felt like he was in many different places at the same time, and that he used to wear like a red cuff or a red handkerchief, and people felt like that had some sort of power within it, and was there like a feather or something. So I think obviously he knows that's part of his persona and who he is, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but knowing that he knows, oh, people see these parts of me or what I wear as part of who I am, he is able to kind of play that to his strengths, as just in terms of strategizing and that sort of thing within the military as well. So I think it did play quite a big part. Obviously, I can hear later on he maybe wasn't so keen, but I do think in the beginning it helps to create that big persona about him.
And I think I agree with Annette. At the beginning, I think he was much more influenced by traditional African religion and also voodoo, which had developed in the colony at the time. Towards the end, I think he moves away from it and moves more towards Catholicism. Well, his tribe was the Alada people, and I think people united, especially those who were born on the African continent, because they had this unifying thing between them. They were born on the continent, they could still speak the language. I think that helped them to unite and also helped them as a people to fight for their freedom. I mean, there were slave uprisings before him. I can't remember the name of the leader who was hanged.
Yeah, it began with M.
McCandle, yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So yeah, I do feel that because they believe strongly in their African ancestral roots and their religion, and I do
They
feel
were
that.
separatists as well, though, weren't they?
Sorry.
They were separatists because they felt that they needed to wipe out all the white settlers,
Yes.
which I can understand why they would want to do that.
Hmm.
But he, a bit like Mandela, is saying no. Not only do we need them, but at the same time, if we did that, then who have we become? We
Yeah.
become worse than them or as bad as them.
Hmm.
So for two reasons, practical and also moral reasons, we don't need to do that.
Hmm. Yeah.
Sorry to butt in.
No, no, no. That's fine. That's fine. Yes. I mean, I do think that it did play some part in uniting people. Coming back to the book, so it's been described very much as an academic work, and I just wondered how you felt about that, if how you felt about the writing, and also the inclusion of the posters, the letters, and the images in the middle. How you felt that affected your understanding and also your enjoyment of the book.
I guess it's affected me because I'm struggling to get through it. But I don't want to say that as a criticism because that's just I don't know how you that's just the way the book has been written. I think there's either two ways you could write the book, and this is just how he's able to explain his life, I suppose. I don't know if you might find it too watered down if you try to bring in too much of how he was outside of that. I'm not sure. For me, it's too academic in the sense that I can't. It's not something I want to pick up every day. It's just I need to read something else alongside I'm not waiting to read it. I can't. It's not that I can't wait to whip it out. That's the that's the problem. But yeah, I'm not I'm not sure. But it's just something I think is an ongoing thing for me. Like I said, if I was using it to reference and I was writing an essay, it'd be great. But in terms of this solely being what I'm going to read, it's just too academic for me to focus on it alone.
And how about the descriptions and the content? I thought some of it was repetitive. I thought that there was some material that did not necessarily need to be included. I mean, I didn't mind so much that it was written in academic style, I guess. It was more the detail into which he went that I found frustrating sometimes.
Actually, just even yesterday, the parts about how his troops were lacking in food and in clothing, and that was about in general, it was around 3 pages. Other things were going on, but he always kept going back to, and they didn't have this and they didn't have that, and I was like, okay, I understand they were lacking, but it was very repetitive, and that part I'm sure was around 3 pages, and I don't know if that much detail was needed because and also just again the text is yeah David said the text is very small, which also I
Mhm.
don't think helps because I will read and I still feel like I'm reading the same page for quite a long time, but maybe that's just a publishing thing that might be aside, but I don't think that helps the experience of reading the book either. My
Mhm.
No,
But Annette, you're,
I
you're you're overlooking the fact that the author is trying to let you know how great Toussaint was,
I get it.
despite the
I
odds,
get
the
it.
overwhelming
They were
odds against
suffering.
him.
I know, but and he got them flour. I understand. I just think there was too much. Yeah, there's just too
yeah,
much repetitiveness.
I
Yeah.
Context is everything.
no, it's I don't. I think it's good to have all the references there, even if I don't look at them. I like to know the author's got grounds, and I might look at them. Especially if I have a second go at it. But for me, it was a bit blow by blow. Some of it, he ran here, and then he ran here, and then he ran here, and then he ran here, and I got lost. In some ways, it was sort of like you can't see the wood for the trees, but I think that is also partly my fault for trying to read it all very quickly. But I think just for the general reader, you don't really need that much detail. But it's good that somebody's got it there, I suppose.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think it would be nice if it was more concise, because it would make it more accessible for readers. I think it'd be more approachable if it was a bit more, something was done maybe graphic with the chapters or with the illustrations. Maybe the illustrations could match up to where the text, or where the incidents are happening, or the people, the characters that he deals with. It would maybe that would make it a bit more accessible. But I did also like the end. I didn't know all of the how much he'd influenced popular culture and modern rock music and all that. So that kind of came at the end, and that was just a nice surprise because I didn't know any of that. That was good too to read. But yeah, I find the writing style. I wonder if it could be just more concise and maybe do something linear with the chapter titles to make it easier to follow. Because I did read it slowly, but I found it really really difficult to read as well.
Taiwo, you
I
disagree.
must protest. That
I knew
disagree
you
with you
would.
all.
I knew you would.
Disagree with you all strongly.
Go on then. Tell us why we're wrong.
This was the right book for the right time and the right man. This was a great man. Damn it, a great man. And I feel that what he needed to do was make it like David Olusoga when he did his book,
Black British
I think
History.
Black and British, I think, where he did the main book and then he did another YA version, a bit not really watered down, but suitable for a different audience.
That was for children, wasn't it?
That was for children.
Yeah.
I feel I'm not a child.
Your children to me. I'm your father. I say I'm your father. What is it?
Yeah, the illustrations are beautiful.
I love the fact that it was academic. I love the fact that he had loads and loads of notes. I love that he had so much in terms of acknowledgement. Even the chronology, you're like year by year, month by month, I felt that if you kind of dip in and dip out, it's more like a reference book rather than a sit down, I'm going to have a cup of coffee and read this book in one sitting. No, it's more of a reference book. And it kind of whet my appetite to really understand more about him because I felt that he didn't really criticize him. He was just too pro Louverture. I mean, I struggle with the French because when it comes to languages, I'm always rubbish. So the French names, I struggle with all the French names and all the rest of it. But I felt that it really gave me, being the first book about this guy that I've ever read, it really gave me a full insight, or at least a very good perspective, a good way to get into who this person, the legend, really was. And as I said before, I mean, I'm definitely going to read the C.L.R. James book Black Jacobeans. Yeah, definitely read that.
Okay, so nobody's made any comments about the images and the illustrations in the middle.
I love the images. I love the color photographs. I love the plates. I love the kind of the line drawings as well. I felt there should have been more line drawings, the black and white ones.
And I thought the images were really good. For me, they kind of broke down the heaviness, I guess, of the text, because sometimes I would just stop reading because as it's quite dense and heavy. So sometimes I would actually just stop what I was reading and then come and look through the images and then go back to what I was reading. So for me, they were a welcome break. But also, it's interesting to see how he was perceived and in art form. And there are some images that I saw in here that kind of did make me chuckle. One titled "The Oath of the Ancestors," with the mixed race guy and the black guy, and then the white Jesus
and the white God. Yes.
Yes. So I thought that was quite interesting. But yeah, and then there was one where he was on a horse, a black and white one. He's on a horse, and he's just depicted as really muscular.
And his lips. They've done something to his lips. They've made him more Negro than the Negro.
Well, in some of them, yes. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I really liked them, and they were a welcome break from the heaviness of the content sometimes.
Yeah, as Taiwo mentioned, I think it would be nice to have a watered down version and then have it almost like an annual. You get some of these books on royalty. It shows you their childhood pictures or some of the context of where they lived, and then have it really more explanatory. Got more guidance around specific incidents where it happened. Maybe that would be not really guide the reader through it.
Also, the maps. I found it interesting because I've always been confused about Haiti. I always used to think Haiti was a whole island, not realizing that it was like an island divided into two. So a bit like the island of Ireland. I've always kind of been confused. Why is there a chunk of it that is British and then the rest of it isn't? Or so yeah, it kind of gave me a bit of an insight into this is why it's been divided. You know, colonial powers. Spain had parts, the French had parts, and then Louverture is trying to reunify both parts and all the rest of it.
I like the maps, I like the chronology and all the notes. I like all that. I felt I did get a bit lost with in some of the early parts where it's just describing the different series of sort of battles and skirmishes and so on that were going on. And I sort of thought it didn't really matter too much. You know, you got the general idea.
Do you feel that there was enough historical content about what else was happening? Well, in Europe and maybe the US. Well, there's always nothing about what's happening in Africa, so I don't expect Africa to be included there. But do you feel that there was enough context?
I don't think he could have really given more in this book because there's so much there anyway. But I do still think, personally, I find it interesting to know what a bit more about what they were saying in France about what he was up to. Maybe they just didn't have time. They were too busy with their revolution and then Napoleon. Because Napoleon, I mean, like he is busy. I don't know how the dates work out, but he's busy rushing around trying to go to Moscow and being exiled and coming back and all that. I would like to put some of those things a bit more in context. And the British, I think, the War of Independence is kind of taking place around this same time, if I remember correctly. So there's an awful lot going on. So which must have, to some extent, assisted him, as we said before.
I agree, Katrina, because I kept trying to work out. So what was going on in Jamaica that the British were afraid that this whole idea of rebellion being in the air and the slaves rising up against their masters in quote, you know, what was going on at that time in Jamaica? There was kind of a slight alluding towards it, but it couldn't really go into it because already the book is a bit too long anyway. So to kind of then go over to Jamaica and do some research and add that, it just lengthens the book even more. But yes, it would have been, I guess those are other books for other research.
Okay, so in the end, he was outmaneuvered by Napoleon.
But was he? Was he outmaneuvered? And for me, that was the biggest question. And when I mentioned earlier about this whole thing about having a messiah complex, I was reading between the lines, or maybe I wasn't reading between the lines. Did he submit himself knowing that, you know, he was going to be captured? Because the author himself was saying, why is it that when he went there, he only went there with, I think, a couple of servants or something like that, whereas before he used to go with this, like 300 men and all these bodyguards and all the rest, because he knew. He was like a Nancy, wasn't he? He was very tricksy. He knew that people would try to kill him. At that particular time, he went there with very few people, and then he got caught. It's like he knew he was going to get caught.
But he was still outmaneuvered because at the end of the day, he got caught, no?
Well, you're
did he
saying
get caught or did he surrender himself?
It's a kind of Garden of Gethsemane approach.
Like a constructive dismissal.
No, I'm not sure I agree. I think by the time at that
He's a legend. He's a legend. You've got to agree.
No, I don't agree. I'm sorry. No, I think at that point I don't know. I don't know whether or not he was age or whether or not he was just too tired. Because I feel that he was a bright man. And as you said, he knew he was going to get caught. So why did he go? He still hadn't achieved independence. That was his whole aim. You'd think that he would stay.
Maybe he knew the game was up. Maybe he knew that it's not going to happen in his lifetime. So if he martyrs himself, that is also political maneuvering. Let me create a legend.
Yeah, but it wasn't guaranteed that he would create a legend given the fact that history is not written by the losing side.
That's true.
Yeah, I wonder if he always flew in the face of being arrested. It was always a risk, wasn't it? The types of activities he did, he was always going to be a target. But I don't know, but it did feel very sad, that feeling when he was in captivity. This was such a sad feeling that he's reduced to being locked up, and it was very, ignoble, and it was very sad because we've been building up all this majestic leader, and then all of a sudden he's kind of thrown into captivity again, and yes, that's difficult really to read.
Yeah, I agree with you. I thought it was quite sad the way his life ended, given all that he had achieved. For him to die in the castle alone and not being allowed to see his family, not being allowed his own clothes and books and so on. I did feel quite sad that that's how his life ended.
It felt as if the book broke there. So rather than where all the plates and the photographs and illustrations are, it seems as if it was building up to his, successes, and then climax with the Constitution, then his downfall, and then it's like almost not quite a new book, but a totally kind of different direction where it's how the legend came about.
So, what then do you think was his legacy, or is his legacy? I think he inspired a lot of independence movements across different continents. He inspired Castro in Cuba, the independence movements in Africa, and I think it was the Negritude movement in Francophone Africa. Been lots of plays about him. Even now, when you think about it, Haiti was the only country or slave country that was able to gain independence for the slaves. So even up to today, I think when you do think about him, he's held in very high regard.
He's like a founding father, isn't he?
Yeah.
And some people say that Haiti is still being punished by the West for it, even till today.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth, Taiwo. It feels like they've never been forgiven, isn't it?
Haiti celebrated 200 years of independence this month.
Oh, did it?
It did, yes. Yeah, and unfortunately, as you said, it does feel like they're still being punished. It's still destitute. I mean, only end of last year, you had either a president or prime minister assassinated. It seems very
Unlucky.
unlucky and
Natural disasters
unstable.
as well.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you do have that as well. So you do wonder, they are being punished, as you said, for daring to want independence and for daring to fight and then to win against the might of the British, the Spanish, and the French. I think it was a bittersweet victory, given where the country is now.
I still feel it was a battle worth fighting, even if the
I
even if the
agree.
price that you pay is a heavy price. I'd say, damn it, we're born to die anyway. Let me die not on my knees. Let me die, standing up,
Fighting.
fighting.
I absolutely agree with you. Rona, who unfortunately was unable to join us because of technical issues, she had issues with the title Spartacus. She basically wanted to understand why are we making comparison with a Greek gladiator.
It did pass through my mind actually when that I don't see all these things where it's the black something of something else we know well is quite irritating. But I guess it is a selling point, isn't it? It
Marketing.
gives, yeah, I think it's a marketing thing.
And also the link with being enslaved, isn't it? So Spartacus was
Well,
someone
yeah,
that was enslaved, and then he
that's
kind
what's
of fought for his freedom. So in the same way with, I guess, but I think Louverture was much more, wasn't he?
yes, much more. But the thing is, if they just put it the life of Toussaint Louverture, would anybody have a clue? Except from people who are already sort of know something about it. If you put Black Spartacus, I think it just makes people,
Yeah.
they know it's going to be something to do with slaves and it's something to do with black people. So
And
it's
power.
going to pull them in that way, I think.
Yeah, and also one of the films about him is the Black Napoleon. Is this strapline? So that's another twist again.
It's interesting that they've compared him to the person that captured him.
Yes, that's true.
But I thought I could see those comparisons with Napoleon, actually. Not that know that much about Napoleon, but just as somebody who's a great general, good at winning battles, but then gets a bit out of hand when they're in power, as it were. Because that's what I thought with Toussaint. It's one thing to kind of win a revolution, but then how you develop that revolution is always the problem, isn't it? And he faced that problem like other people have, and it's hard.
But it's invariable, though, isn't it? Because the person that wins the war cannot generally be the person that will win the peace.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be someone else. I mean, look at Churchill, it's the same thing. The qualities that you need to win the war are not the same qualities to win the peace. I do love the cover on the book, on the hardcover, the guinea fowl. I just love the way it looks.
Yeah.
It's so good.
But I also like the description, the reason as to why they used the guinea fowl.
What was the reason? Is it an African motive of some sort?
You know,
No.
it's in the book.
It's in the book. I can't remember. I think they said something about it being of the rural people, African people, or something.
Yeah, something about it not being domesticated, being quite rebellious.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly, but I remember reading it because I was looking at a guinea fowl at the time that I actually read it. Yeah, exactly. Why? When I read it, I looked at the guinea fowl. I'm like, oh, okay, that's why. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
And I
But
think
yeah,
he identified with it, didn't he?
yeah. Just trying to find it. I think it was in one of the pictures.
Yes. It's there somewhere.
Mm.
I know
But
I read it.
anyhow, so are you happy that you read this book?
Yes.
I know, Taiwo, you loved it, so you're absolutely ecstatic. In fact, you recommended it, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Uh-huh. Then
Although
you should have been
I didn't know it was this long at the time that I recommended it.
Well, I did, and I also knew that the font was quite tiny
Oh,
because
okay.
I went to the bookshop to have a look, and so the hardback, the font was quite tiny. So I'm like, oh, I'll wait for the paperback and see and see what it's like.
There's
But
no
you know, the
escape.
paper, it's just the same. So yeah, I knew it was big. But anyway, how about everybody else? Are you glad that you read the book?
Yes, very much so. I think it's very good. It is hard. It's proper reading. You know, you can't just sit there and gloss through it. It's proper reading, but it's really interesting. I like Toussaint from what I've read. I didn't know much before. These things always make you want to know more, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
So I would quite like to know what happened with Dessalines and how Haiti got to where it is today, because you know, we're reading about it. It sounds prosperous. It sounds like everybody could feed themselves, you know, and it sounded very cultured as well in the towns.
It's the debt that they had to pay to the French.
Yes. And I'd like to know. I just don't know much about that, so maybe I'll look it up. Maybe Wikipedia will explain it to me, but maybe I'll read it somewhere else.
It's funny
Yeah,
you saying that. It's funny you saying that, Katrina, because it made me immediately think of Assembly, which I know we're going to read later on.
Mm-hmm.
Oh
And
yeah.
you know the infamous tweet from I think it was the Treasury, saying that I
They
think it was
finally paid off
we finally
the
paid
slave,
off.
slave
Yeah,
owners. Yeah.
so the government
Mm.
has paid off to the,
I was quite offended by that because my
and then they
taxes
removed it.
were actually going to pay for slavery. I
Yes,
was very offended by it.
but it
Mm.
just shows the whole kind of immorality of morality. You know, the
Mm-hmm.
world is upside down.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
The
Mm.
enslaved people get nothing, but I guess that's the way of the world, isn't it? But the
Mm.
person that enslaved the other human being needs to be
Is the
fought
one
off,
that get compensated.
and they're paid off by the government, and the
Yeah.
government is who? It's all of us, our taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Mm.
Hence, AT is still poor.
Mm. Because I googled Google Images for some of the places that were mentioned, and they look lovely. And you know, because I've never really taken any particular interest in Haiti, you know, all you ever see is the latest disaster on the television,
Mm.
and it's sort of really interesting to. But I mean, that's the way of the world as well. It's usually
Yes.
like that, isn't it? But yeah, it's good. I'm very pleased I read it.
Sometimes though, I do despair with Haiti. I mean, there was that incident, wasn't there, of the Oxfam
Yeah.
aid workers, the
Yeah.
whole scandal. I just think, yeah, where else but Haiti? Is Haiti you're going to go?
Well, because they think they can get away with it somewhere like that,
Yeah.
isn't it? Because of all the poor, because everything is so confused and chaotic and corrupt. I presume I might be doing it. That might not be
Life
true,
is cheap.
but that's the impression one gets. People think they can get away with everything. Thank God, not completely everything.
It's on the inner sleeve where it's talking about the cover image.
Okay.
That's where you read it.
Okay. What does the guinea fowl stand for then?
It says celebrating his revolutionary freedom, spirituality, and closeness to nature. According to Haitian tradition, the guinea fowl refused to be domesticated after its introduction into the colony and tended to flee into the wild. So, like the Maron, the runaway slaves, the bird became a symbol of liberty and resistance to oppression.
Yeah, I like that. And yeah,
What it says.
funny, the guinea fowl that I was looking at kept coming back. I wish they didn't come back, but that's a completely different story. They're so noisy.
No, you don't kill them and eat them.
That was my Christmas dinner.
Really?
Yeah, for 2 years
Okay.
in a row now. Yeah,
What is it like?
it's good. It's
nice.
you have to cook. You have to cook two because they're quite small and it
They
shrinks a
are.
bit more. But no, it's nice. Yeah.
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 My father somehow adopted them as his pets.
Really?
Yeah. Geese and guinea fowl. Yeah, he
Geese
will
and
not.
guinea.
He says he can't, even the ducks that he rears, he can't apparently kill them and eat them. Although he sell them to other people to kill and eat, he
Can't do
can't do it.
It's got an
So,
emotional attachment.
exactly, which I think is quite sad. Anyhow.
I understand that though.
Yeah.
No, I'd be able to raise them and still kill them and eat them.
Oh
Oh, there
gosh.
you go.
That's just the way I am.
Yeah. So I think we got up to Katrina enjoying it. Annette, will you finish it?
I will. I'm not going to put pressure on myself now, but I will finish it. I'm not gonna put it back on the shelf. It's gonna be around so that I will pick it up. But I'm just gonna take my time. I think that's the best way to do it because before I've just been trying to cram it in. It's not going in. So yeah.
Show us your hands. Your fingers are probably crossed.
I've even like this is where I am. So I'm gonna take this a day and I'll try and build up from there. I'll be proud of myself when I do finish it. That's why I want to persevere.
And how about you, David? Are you glad you read it?
Yeah, I'm glad I read it. I found it quite interesting and give lots of insight into his journey and around leadership as well, and how he managed to achieve things, and his notion of equality and fraternity, and how he used those kind of ideas around all those Republican ideals to benefit people. So I think that's really interesting. Yeah, and it was a very difficult read, but I am glad I read it, and it does make me think. It kind of captures my imagination. What was life really like for him, and what would it have been, and all the different cultures. And the question around voodoo as well. It made me look up that religion. I don't really know too much about it. It kind of made me think more and more about Haiti, and I also googled it, and it looked like a really popular holiday destination. So many beautiful, like paradise there. So I think it's something. Yeah, it's so gorgeous there. So that was something I really didn't know too much about as well. So yeah, definitely a good read.
If Taiwo hadn't put it on the reading list, I'm not sure I would have picked it up. So thank you, Taiwo, for suggesting and recommending
Anytime.
it. And yeah, I too, I am actually glad I really read this. It has made me want to go and pick up another book and then just really find out more about just not just the revolution, but after revolution, post independence, what happened and how Haiti has got to where it is now. So definitely, hopefully, we'll get some time and do that. But I do think that this book should be on the curriculum and people should know about this man and his achievements. I mean, given the time that he was living and what he was doing when he was doing it, we should really know more about him than we do. So yeah, thank you, Taiwo, for recommending it. So it only leaves me to say thank you so much, guys, for
Thank you.
another wonderful discussion. It's been great. It's been interesting hearing your opinions, and it's nice to see that we actually don't differ too much, apart from Taiwo, in our reading and understanding. And yeah, so thank you again for your time.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
See you guys next month.
See you next month.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for listening. You can join the conversation on Twitter, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Just search for Book and Lounge. Till next time, bye bye.